On the 16th of May 2026, Roosevelt Field Mall, Long Island. Police used pepper spray on a crowd that had been queuing since the night before. 4 people arrested. 19 Swatch stores closed for safety reasons, all of it over a $400 pocket watch with an octagonal bezel. That bezel belongs to Audemars Piguet, a brand that, in 1972, launched a steel watch priced higher than gold. A brand collectors have paid $200,000 to own. A brand that, 3 weeks ago, sold its most recognizable shape to the mall crowd for less than a flight to Geneva. Something happened between 1972 and now. It didn't happen overnight. The night that saved a company. April 10, 1971, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Georges Goulet, managing director of Audemars Piguet, called freelance designer Gérald Genta on the phone. The brief: design a steel sports watch, unlike anything that has ever existed. Deadline: tomorrow morning. The Basel fair opened the next day. This wasn't a typical creative brief, and AP wasn't in a typical position. It was a 100-year-old manufacturer from Le Brassus, a village in the Vallée de Joux where the winters are long and the watchmakers work in silence. The quartz crisis was about to hit the Swiss industry like a slow flood. Cheap, accurate Japanese movements were going to make the entire premise of mechanical watchmaking look like it belonged in a museum. AP needed something that would survive what was coming. Something so different that no quartz movement could replicate it, not in its architecture, not in what it said about the person wearing it. Genta drew overnight. His inspiration came from a diver's brass helmet, its porthole window, its visible bolts holding pressure against deep water. By morning, he had it. An octagonal bezel secured by 8 hexagonal screws, a case with an integrated bracelet, a tapisserie dial with a texture no one had used on a dress watch. The design was filed under U.S. patent 3,756,017. The sketch had taken 1 night. When the Ref. 5402 appeared at Basel in 1972, the price was 3,300 Swiss francs. Not for a gold watch, not for a movement with a tourbillon or a perpetual calendar. For steel, at a time when a Rolex Submariner cost around 330 francs. When a gold Patek Philippe Calatrava, the benchmark for watch prestige, cost less. The press didn't know how to place it. They landed on the world's most expensive steel watch, which was accurate and slightly bewildered at the same time. Dealers questioned whether a luxury watch in steel could ever make sense to their clients. The collectors who came to Basel walked past the display. Some laughed. For 2 years, the Royal Oak sat. Picture the AP sales manager in 1973, fielding calls from distributors asking when the company was going to release something that people would actually pay for. The Royal Oak was still on shelves. Still the same price. Still steel. No explanation. No discount. The attitude, embedded in every conversation, was the same as the watch itself. You'll understand eventually. By the late 70s, the Royal Oak had become a cult object. The early 80s made it an icon. And by the 90s, every brand in the luxury sports watch category, every integrated bracelet, every octagonal reference point, was drawing a line back to that one overnight sketch. Here is what matters about that origin story, though. The Royal Oak didn't succeed because the market caught up to what AP was doing. It succeeded because AP refused to care whether the market caught up. That indifference wasn't arrogance. It was inseparable from the product itself. You couldn't have the watch without the attitude that produced it. The attitude was half of what you were paying for. A collector who bought a Ref. 5,402 inches, 1974, wasn't just buying a watch. They were buying the belief that most people were wrong about what luxury was supposed to look like, and that AP knew better. That belief was the real value proposition. The octagonal bezel and the tapisserie dial were just its physical form. That distinction is going to matter a lot later in this story. The overnight sketch was one thing, but AP didn't just survive one controversy. They built a habit of surviving them. The next one got personal. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, Let's move on to the next part. The beast that Genta disowned. Emmanuel Gate was 26 years old in 1993. He'd been working in AP's design team for 2 years when he produced a sketch that Gérald Genta himself publicly called a desecration of his work. Gate's design took the royal oak silhouette and inflated it past anything the original had intended. The case went to 42 millimeters. Thickness went to 14 millimeters, nearly twice the 7 millimeter profile of the original jumbo. Rubber chronograph pushers, a compressed gasket ring sitting visibly around the bezel. The watch looked like it had been built to withstand deep water, or possibly a fistfight. Genta went on record without hesitation. He called it the beast. He meant it as condemnation. Other industry voices agreed with him. Oversized, rubber-trimmed sports watches were what you wore if you didn't understand fine watchmaking. The offshore broke every proportion that Genta had spent a night perfecting. AP launched it anyway. The Royal Oak Offshore, 1993. Then it became the template for a generation. The offshore didn't just sell. It redefined what a luxury sports watch was permitted to be. Big, physical, unapologetic about its own presence. By 2000, the oversized luxury sports watch was the fastest-growing category in the industry. Hublot followed with the Big Bang. Richard Mille followed with the RM001. Every brand that built a reputation on size and boldness in the 2000s owed something to a sketch that Genta called a mistake. Patek Philippe, as a point of comparison, took the opposite approach to domination by a single design, when their Nautilus Ref 5711 became so culturally powerful that it was threatening to define the entire brand. Patek discontinued it in 2021, not because it was failing, because it was succeeding too completely. Better to sacrifice one icon than to let it consume the whole identity. Patek's long-running advertising campaign, "You never actually own a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation," did not feature a Nautilus. It featured a father and a son. Product being sold was a relationship with time itself, not any specific silhouette. Robb Report ran a piece in mid-2024 with a title that stayed with collectors for months: How Patek Philippe Avoids Audemars Piguet's Royal Oak Problem. The argument was precise. Patek had built multiple distinct collection identities over decades so that no single model could hold the brand hostage to its own success. AP had done the opposite. Every new Royal Oak variation, from the concept to the offshore to the limited editions and celebrity collaborations, there was still fundamentally a conversation about the same design. One man drew overnight in 1971. AP's response to the one-trick pony problem was to make the trick more spectacular, not to develop a second trick. Amplification, not diversification. Two controversies, two survivals. Same mechanism, be more AP than the critics expected, not less. But something was also happening in parallel that design histories don't capture. The people buying the Royal Oak were changing. Where they came from was changing. Who was influencing them was changing. And one specific executive was paying very close attention to all of it. The offshore controversy was about design. What happened next was about culture. And culture, once you invite it in, doesn't always leave on your schedule. The Frenchman who changed the customer. François-Henri Benamias joined Audemars Piguet in 1994. Managing Director of North America in 1999, CEO in 2012. If you want to understand how the Royal Oak became a cultural object rather than just a collector's watch, you need to understand what Benamias was doing in New York and Los Angeles in the early 2000s, when almost no one in Swiss watchmaking was paying attention to hip-hop. In 2005, Benamias met Jay-Z. Not by accident. The watch industry's traditional customer was wealthy, European, older, and almost entirely male, also a shrinking demographic. Benamias understood something his competitors either didn't see or didn't act on. The cultural forces creating new wealth, new aspiration, and new public visibility were in music. Hip-hop specifically. And in hip-hop, the watch was never just a watch. It was a statement about where you started and how far you'd come. The Royal Oak fit that statement almost perfectly. Big case, industrial finishing, stainless steel, expensive. It looked nothing like the slim gold dress watches that inherited wealth wore, which was exactly the point. You didn't buy a royal oak because your father had one. You bought it because you'd earned something nobody had handed you. That origin story, the steel watch that broke the rules of what luxury was supposed to be, resonated with artists who had built careers in exactly that mode. Jay-Z wore it publicly. Rick Ross put the brand in the BMF. Lyric from his 2010 record, "I think I'm Big Meech. Look at my timepiece. It's an Audemars, 100 racks at least." Swizz Beatz co-designed pieces with the brand. Lil Wayne, Drake, DJ Khaled, Meek Mill. The royal oak appeared in music videos, on red carpets, in lyrics counted in the hundreds of millions of streams. By the mid-2010s, Audemars had become shorthand in hip-hop for a particular category of earned success that had nothing to do with the valet de jeu and everything to do with what you'd done to deserve it. Benamias built these relationships personally. He understood that watch collectors and hip-hop artists weren't separate customer types wearing the same product. They were the same ecosystem, feeding each other's desire for the royal oak. The collector wanted what the artist had on his wrist. The artist wanted what the collector had already spent a decade hunting. AP sat at the intersection of both, and Benamias made sure the brand was visible at that intersection before anyone else in Swiss watchmaking thought to look there. Sebastian Vivas, AP's heritage and museum director, described the royal oak offshore's appeal in hip-hop simply, "It came to embody prestige and success." The yellow gold version weighs over 400 grams. You didn't just wear it, you felt it move on your wrist. That physical weight was part of the statement, heavy and expensive and unmistakable. It matched the register of the music that was putting it in lyrics. The secondary market responded. Prices climbed through the late 2010s. Wait lists formed at boutiques. AP moved to a direct retail model, closing its authorized dealer network in favor of brand-owned points of sale. Every customer relationship became a data point in a purchase history system that determined who received allocations and when. And something was quietly shifting underneath all of this. The royal oak was becoming famous for being the royal oak. That sounds simple. It's actually a problem. A brand that's famous for its most famous thing is a brand that has stopped controlling what it means. The meaning belongs to everyone who wants it now, not to the brand that made it. And you can't manage desire that widely distributed. You can only try to respond to it. For a while, demand was still growing faster than supply, so the question stayed buried. Let me know in the comments. Did you first learn about AP through the watch community or through music and pop culture? The cultural pipeline made AP feel untouchable. The distribution strategy was supposed to protect that. What it created instead was something more complicated. The system that turned desire into resentment. This is how you buy a royal oak at retail in 2022. You visit an AP house or boutique. Every point of sale is brand-owned, so there is no shopping around. You ask about a steel royal oak. A sales associate notes your request and explains that allocation is based on purchase history. No prior AP purchases means a 12 to 24-month wait. If you receive an offer at all, want to accelerate? Buy something first, something easier to allocate. The collector, Giovanni Prigigallo, walked into AP's Milan boutique wanting a steel jumbo 15202. The boutique had 5 pieces allocated for the quarter. The proposal: purchase a royal oak 15400 first, and that would move him up on the jumbo list. He refused the condition. He never received the jumbo. "I've made peace with it," he told Robb Report years later. The retail price on that 15400 he didn't want to buy was around 20,000 euros. The 15400 he walked away from now sells for about 28,000 euros on the secondary market. He made peace with a regret that compounded in value. Thousands of collectors had versions of this conversation between 2018 and 2022. The boutique wasn't selling a watch. It was administering a test of compliance. The watch was the reward for passing. And passing involved spending money on something you hadn't chosen. On its surface, this is scarcity management. AP produces roughly 50,000 pieces annually across all collections. Only a fraction are the steel royal oak configurations that everyone actually wants. The mismatch between supply and demand is real, and it's not manufactured. Some prioritization system has to exist. But the specific system AP chose did something it hadn't announced. It fused the watch's meaning with the customer's proven willingness to follow instructions. You weren't just wearing a royal oak, you were wearing evidence that AP had decided you were worth the allocation. That is a powerful feeling, right up until the moment you understand you were being managed. The flippers understood the system their own way. At the secondary market peak in early 2022, a steel Royal Oak Jumbo was trading at €137,000 against a retail price of roughly $27,800. Collectors who had built deep purchase histories were sitting on gains that made the code 1.59 they'd absorbed look like a rounding error. Speculators were treating Royal Oaks the way they'd previously treated Bitcoin. Some boutique staff were reportedly prioritizing their strongest allocations toward clients with the heaviest spend histories, which in practice meant toward the clients most likely to flip immediately. The people who loved the watch longest were losing it to the people who loved the return most. There is a specific type of brand erosion that doesn't appear in revenue reports. It happens when the customers whose visible, public ownership of a brand made other customers want to buy start feeling excluded from the very thing they helped build the demand for. AP wasn't losing buyers in 2022. It was losing something slower and more expensive to replace. The loyalty of the people who had made the Royal Oak feel like something worth working toward in the first place. Sebastian Vivas, AP's heritage and museum director, once described the Royal Oak Offshore's appeal in hip-hop this way. It came to embody prestige and success. The yellow gold version, he noted, weighs over 400 grams. That weight was part of the statement. You didn't just wear the watch, you felt it. The Royal Oak wasn't a quiet signal, it was a declaration. The purchase history system quietly turned that declaration into a credential, which is a different thing entirely. A declaration is something you earn by arriving somewhere. A credential is something you earn by following someone else's rules about how you're supposed to arrive. The Royal Oak started as the former. The boutique allocation system turned it into the latter. Most collectors accepted the trade without naming it. A few noticed the difference, and it bothered them in a way they couldn't fully articulate. The market peaked. Then it broke. And one failed product had been sitting in the middle of all of it for 3 years, getting quietly more expensive to ignore. The watch. The internet destroyed in 48 hours. 7 years. That's how long AP's design team worked on the code 1.59. From roughly 2012 to 2019, the brief was to build a second collection that could stand alongside the Royal Oak instead of in its shadow. Something to prove AP was a manufacturer with genuine range, not a brand riding a 50-year-old design that one man sketched overnight. Benamias stood in front of the industry at SIHH in January 2019 and called it the biggest launch since 1972. Bloomberg ran within 24 hours. Audemars launches a new watch, and the response is, "It's awful." The collector community did not wait for measured analysis. The code 1.59 became an overnight meme. Forum posts, Reddit threads, Instagram comment sections. The criticism hit the aesthetics hard, but the complaints went deeper than that. One comment that circulated widely, "It looks like something Frederique Constant would make for about 1/10 of the price." And with better water resistance, the code 1.59 launched at 30 meters water resistance on a watch, starting at 25,000 Swiss francs. The audience noticed. Michael Friedman, AP's head of complications, offered the official defense. New form language in any medium is often met with a variety of different reactions. The 1972 Royal Oak, the 1993 Offshore, the 2002 Concept, and the 2019 Code 1.59 were all met with divisive opinions. He's historically accurate. The Royal Oak's early reception was confused and cold. The Offshore's early reception involved its own creator, calling it a mistake. But both of those controversies resolved because the products turned out to be ahead of where the market was. The market eventually had to concede it was wrong. That resolution only works when the product actually is ahead. When the backlash is correct, it doesn't resolve, it just ages. 6 years after launch, the code 1.59 trades at 33% below retail. The Royal Oak Offshore is at 23% below retail. And there is a bitter irony in how the purchase history system had been feeding this quietly the whole time. To get a Royal Oak, many collectors had been buying code 1.59 references first. the exact watch they didn't want, as the price of eventually getting the one they did. The Code 1.59 wasn't just a failed product, it was a toll. Every collector who bought one as a gateway knew what it was. AP knew what it was. The secondary market just made the knowledge public and permanent. AP had tried to prove it was more than the Royal Oak. The collector base spent 6 years proving it wasn't. A Watch Crunch thread from 2023 put it clearly. Patek has the Nautilus, the Calatrava, the Aquanaut, the Gondolo. Vacheron Constantin has the Overseas, the Patrimony, the Historiques, the 56. AP has the Royal Oak and the Code 1.59, one of which nobody buys unless they have to. The brand that invented a category with one overnight sketch couldn't name a second thing it was known for. That is not a comfortable position for a member of the Holy Trinity. If you were handed a Code 1.59 as the condition for getting a Royal Oak, do you take the deal? The Code 1.59 told you everything about AP's relationship with its own identity. Then the secondary market crashed, and the reckoning moved from forums to balance sheets. The $400 question. Early 2022. The Royal Oak Jumbo, steel case, blue tapisserie dial, caliber 7121, was trading at 137,000 euros on the secondary market. Retail price, roughly $27,800. The gap between those numbers was where a class of people had built their financial plans. By March 2023, 80,000 euros. By late 2024, 54,000 euros. The watch hadn't been disgraced, discontinued, or redesigned. Nothing about it had changed. What had changed was who was buying it and why. WatchPro editor Rob Corder described the shift in February 2026 with some precision. Aggressive flippers, whose attachment to watchmaking was no deeper than to Bitcoin, had been flushed out. Moderately wealthy people who had spent the pandemic ringing watch journalists for Royal Oak advice had gone silent. The waitlist that had stretched years compressed to weeks by mid-2023. A new customer with no AP purchase history could walk into certain boutiques and receive a steel Royal Oak in weeks. The earned allocation had become the available allocation. At the end of 2023, Benamias left. His tenure had built revenues approaching 2.4 billion Swiss francs annually, positioning AP as the fourth largest Swiss watchmaker on roughly 50,000 pieces a year, and placed the brand's name in more hip-hop lyrics than any watchmaker in history. He handed over something that looked, by every financial measure, like a success. His replacement was Ilaria Resta, a Swiss-Italian executive whose previous position had been president of global perfumery at Firmenich, not a watch person. She assumed the role on the 1st of January 2024 and inherited a cooling secondary market, a Code 1.59 trading below retail, and a collector community doing its own quiet recalibration of what AP meant without Benamias. In September 2025, the publication Miss Tweed reported that Resta was likely to depart after less than 2 years. AP denied it. She stayed. But the question the brand was living inside, who is AP for now and who is it speaking to, wasn't resolved by a press statement. Then, on the 16th of May 2026, at least one answer arrived at a Swatch store. The Royal Pop. Audemars Piguet and Swatch. A pocket watch, not a wristwatch. Bioceramic. About $400 at retail. AP's octagonal bezel. AP's name and signature font. The Navacron balance spring that Swatch and AP had actually co-developed together over years. 8 models, over 90 hours of power reserve, sold in Swatch stores worldwide. Police were called to 19 locations. Stores closed. Pepper spray deployed at Roosevelt Field Mall on Long Island. 4 arrests. The coverage reached far beyond the watch-collecting community. For about a week, the Royal Pop was everywhere. The reaction from collectors wasn't uniformly negative. Some saw a clear, strategic logic, reaching a generation that would otherwise only encounter AP in a music video. The Swatch collaboration had real technical substance behind it. The Navacron co-development is documented. This wasn't purely cosmetic. And Swatch's Moon Swatch, the Omega collaboration that launched in 2022, had demonstrably brought new collectors into fine watchmaking. There was a real argument for the royal pop as a pipeline, but the reaction from the brand's most loyal core was something specific and worth sitting with. DDG, a rapper and content creator, had spent $200,000 on his Audemars Piguet. He went on record. His point was direct. Someone who waited until 2026 could now wear the AP silhouette, carry the AP name, and participate in the cultural meaning of the royal oak for $400. The thing DDG paid for was not the caliber 7121 movement, or the Côte de Genève finishing, or the hand-chamfered case edges. He paid for the specific cultural weight the royal oak carried as a signal of where someone had arrived. And Audemars Piguet had just sold a version of that signal at the mall to the crowd for the price of a good dinner. The rolling out piece that covered the rapper reactions put it sharply. For hip-hop culture, a watch is rarely just a watch. It is a statement about where someone started and how far they've come. The royal oak specifically carried that weight. When the price of entry drops by 99%, the statement gets harder to make. Whether the royal pop reads as a clever cultural bridge or the beginning of a slow erosion of brand equity depends entirely on who is wearing it and what it comes to mean to them. That's the part AP can't control. They can price the royal pop. They can engineer the Nivacron spring. They can choose which Swatch stores to open first. What they cannot do is dictate what the $400 octagonal bezel comes to represent in the conversations people have about it, in the videos it appears in what it means the first time someone picks one up at a mall and feels like they're touching something that belongs to a world they'd previously only seen from the outside. AP has broken its own rules 3 times and won 3 times. The steel watch in 1972 that sat unsold for 2 years. The Beast in 1993 that its own designer publicly disowned. The hip-hop strategy in the early 2000s that the traditional watch press dismissed as brand dilution. Every single time, AP was more itself than the critics expected, not less, and the critics had to revise. The royal pop is different in one specific way that I keep coming back to. The ref. 5,402 inches. 1972 was made without any particular concern for whether anyone would want it. Gaulle needed a solution to a crisis, and Genta drew one from instinct. The offshore was a manual gate, pushing past the original in a direction that felt right to him and uncomfortable to everyone else. The hip-hop strategy was Benamia's seeing where culture was moving before anyone in his industry was paying attention. The royal pop was designed to generate a cue. The crowd at Roosevelt Field Mall was not the confused silence of 1972 dealers walking past a display they didn't understand. It was an engineered response to a product built for exactly that kind of response. One watch was made in defiance of what the market wanted. The other was made in direct response to what the market would consume. Whether that distinction matters in the long run, whether it marks the start of a new chapter or a slow corrosion of the thing that made AP worth paying for, is the question the collector who spent $200,000 is currently sitting with. He's not alone. The brands that endure longest in this industry are not always the ones with the best products. Some of the most technically accomplished watches in history were made by companies that no longer exist. What survives is belief, the conviction that the watch means something specific, and the discipline to protect that meaning even when protecting it costs revenue. AP built that belief over 50 years by refusing to explain itself to people who didn't understand it.